So I've been reading throughout the month pretty consistently, and I feel like I haven't read as much this month as some months. I'm trying to take the pressure off myself in terms of reading goals and stuff, but I've only finished one book this month, and it's already the 15th. I finished King Sorrow by Joe Hill early this month. Really terrific novel. I really enjoyed it. It's about a dragon. Anyway, I wanted to make a video about what I'm reading lately. I don't think it's going to take too long. I've read some other stuff besides that I want to cover. But first, in case you've never been here before, I'm Randy Ray. This is The Literate Texan. I talk about literature here, highbrow, lowbrow, everything in between. Try not to be too snobby about it. And I just wanted to do a quick what I've been reading video. Like I say, I finished King Sorrow early in the month. And when I finished that, I did it as a buddy read with Brandy at the Book Eclectic. I'll link to her channel below. She's terrific. You should definitely subscribe to her channel. She doesn't make as many videos as she used to, but it's worth catching up on her backlog of videos for sure. And then you'll be ready when she has new videos too. So definitely check her channel out. But yeah, we buddy read King Sorrow and both decided that we really liked Joe Hill. And then we started reading Nosferatu, which is also a Joe Hill novel. It's one from about 10 years ago. And she's finished with it already. I'm in the middle of it. It's good. I like it. I'm not far enough into it yet to decide whether I like it better than King Sorrow or not. Based on what I've read so far, I like King Sorrow better. And then in terms of novels, the only other novel that I'm working on is The Lord of the Rings. I'm behind on my reading there. I should be finished with The Two Towers and starting on The Return of the King, but I'm not. But I'll probably get caught up on that over this weekend. Now, you might be thinking that's not a lot of reading at all, but that's not the only reading I do, okay? I made a video not too long ago about my Bradbury reading project, which is where you try to become more creative. And Ray Bradbury suggests that if you read a poem, a short story, and an essay every day for 1,000 days in a row, you'll have read so much different stuff in so many different formats that your brain is just going to draw connections and form ideas. And I'm on maybe day 20 or so of my Bradbury challenge, so I've got about 980 days to go. But I'm already starting to notice themes that are underlying the reading that I'm doing. And I thought rather than just give you a list of everything I've been reading, I would go through these themes with you and tell you what I've read that fell into those buckets. The first major theme that it seems like I've been reading about is power, authority, and moral pressure. Those are perennial concerns in literature for sure. Number 2, myth, time, and the weight of the past. That's a big theme, especially these days, especially as I'm getting older. Number 3, alienation, identity, and the modern mind. I don't know how you can live in today's society without feeling alienated at some point. And then number 4, the joy and strangeness of storytelling itself. So that's a fun category too. So what have I read in these categories? Also, I wanted to point out, Steve Donahue had a video the other day called How to Keep a Reading Journal. And I just want to point out, a reading journal does not have to be complex or involved at all, okay? The more complex and involved you make it, probably the better. But it can be as simple as this. I wanted to show you this. This is a spiral notebook I have. The only reading that I'm journaling in here is my project, my Ray Bradbury project. And so every day I just list the stuff from the Ray Bradbury project that I'm reading. So every day I list the poem that I read, the short story that I read, and also the essay that I read in order. And you can see it starts here with day 1, and then there's the date, and there's the names of the books and the stories. You can see day 1 was December 29th when I started keeping this reading journal. And the poem I read that day was Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson. The story I read that day was The Rocking Horse Winter by D.H. Lawrence, and the essay I read that day was Debbie's Requirements by Augustin Burroughs. Now I'm going to speak about those 3 in a row. Ulysses is this terrific poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson. I think I've made a video about it already, but it's basically about Odysseus. He's returned to the island after having been gone for 20 years or whatever, and now he's ruling over these people, but he doesn't know these people. You know, he's been off adventuring for 20 years. His son is really good at playing politics and being an administrator of a government. He's not good at it at all. And he seems to resent the idea that his wife has gotten older too. He talks about his aged wife as if it were like a really negative thing. And I guess, yeah, 20 years is a long time to be away from a woman. But he's gotten older too. It's chauvinistic as hell. But at any rate, he decides that even though he's old and he can't perform the great deeds that he was able to perform in his youth, those days are behind him. There's still stuff to do. There's still challenges to be met and battles to be won and that sort of thing. So he gets together his mariners from his old crew and asks them to go back out to sea with him and start going adventuring with him again. And you get the impression there's a few of them, they're going to go. Anyway, it's a terrific poem. I've read it, I don't know how many times. I never get tired of Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson. So you might look through my backlog for Poetry Thursday. I'm sure I read that on Poetry Thursday at some point. But that was the poem that day. And then the story that day was The Rocking Horse Winner by D.H. Lawrence. And spoilers ahead. The Rocking Horse Winner is about a little boy who can predict the outcomes of races. But to do so, he's got to get on his rocking horse and rock for a while. And the more sure he wants to be and the bigger the stakes are, the harder he has to ride that little rocking horse. Until eventually he rides that rocking horse so hard that he gets a sure thing for a really big bet, but he dies. Everybody's rich, but he's dead. And it's interesting because the technique or the mechanism there is similar to what's going on in Nosferatu. And again, more spoilers. The main character is a young woman named Vic, or the Brat, and she rides a bicycle. She's got a magical bicycle. It was just some bicycle they bought at the bike shop, but for her, it's magical. And she rides it across a bridge anytime somebody loses something important. And when she rides it across the bridge, she is taken to the place wherever that lost item is so she can recover the lost item and come back. Of course, every time she does this, she gets a pain behind her left eye, sweats, flu-like symptoms, all the same things that the kid in the Rocking Horse Winner was going through. The big difference is she hasn't died yet. This hasn't taken enough of a toll on her to kill her yet. Although you get the feeling that it might at some point. Anyway, it's just an interesting little, I'm sure Joe Hill read the Rocking Horse Winner and got some inspiration for his latest, for that book from there. It's not his latest book. I misspoke, Nosferatu though, but I'm sure that had to be part of it. And then the essay that I read was called Debbie's Requirements by Augustin Burroughs. Augustin Burroughs writes memoirs mostly, and they're subdivided into short essays. And in this one, he's explaining how when he lived in New York City and started climbing the ladder in the advertising industry, he decided to hire a housekeeper. She turns out to be a legitimate dwarf. She's 4'8", I believe. 4'7", 4'8". He hires her at the recommendation of a friend. And she has a bunch of requirements that she needs in order to clean his house. And if he doesn't have the stuff that she needs, she goes out to buy it and has to bill him for it. But she prefers that he has it all there for her. And it's a pretty big list. And she gets more and more demanding with her lists of what she requires over time. But also, she does a really good job of cleaning the house from where she stands at eye level below. But if it's over where she can reach, she doesn't get up on a chair or a ladder or anything to clean. So like his windows will be spotless up to the point where she can't reach anymore. And then they get smudged and they've got some hand wipe marks. And he has a talking to with her about that. At any rate, things go really sour in their relationship at some point and they wind up going to court. And, the story was better than the ending. I'll just put it that way. But yeah, that's just an example. But anyway, this is an example of a reading journal that you can keep that, isn't involved at all. It's just got the date and the list of what I read on those dates. And I didn't include page numbers or anything on here. So you don't have to. But you can be as involved as you want to. And there are some pages where I did get a little more involved here. For example, I got a list of suggested poems here. So I have a poems TBR that's right smack dab in the middle of this journal. And I haven't read most of these either. The Second Coming by W.B. Yeats, To an Athlete Dying Young by A.E. Housman. Ballad of the Hanged Men by Francois Villon, I think. Anyway, yeah, so also, and that's just in the middle of my reading journal. And then so I've also got a list of essays that I want to read. And you can see some of those are checked off. On Self-Respect by Joan Didion isn't checked off, but I did read it. And then there's some that I haven't read yet, too. So there's a lot to look forward to there. But yeah, so you don't have to overthink a reading journal. It can be as simple as that. And it could be even simpler if all you read are full-length books. You could literally just have a list of books and the date that you finished each of them, or you could include the date that you started, the date that you finished, the number of pages. The amount of information that you include is up to you. But yeah, I really enjoyed Steve Donahue's video about how to keep a reading journal, but I wanted to point out, customize that as fully as you can to fit your needs as a reader. And you want to create a journal that future you is really going to enjoy reading. So I want to talk about what else I read. Other poems, other short stories, other essays. But I want to look at them thematically. I don't want to just give you a list, okay? So this first theme that I mentioned was power, authority, and moral pressure. Obviously, Ulysses, you can see how that would apply. But number one on my list there of what I read Shooting an Elephant, which is an essay by George Orwell. He's working over in Africa, and he's part of the government. He's de facto in charge, in fact, during this episode. And he has to shoot an elephant. The only problem is he doesn't know how to shoot an elephant, so it doesn't die very quickly. Even if you shoot an elephant with an elephant gun, you still got to hit him in the right spot. But I think it took quite a while for this elephant to die. And the only reason he shot the elephant in the first place was because everybody was watching him. He drew a big crowd when he went to shoot the crazed elephant. So anyway, that was really interesting. George Orwell, by the way, I've read several essays from him. I'm really growing fond of George Orwell, and I want to read his other novels and stuff too. I've read Down and Out in Paris and London, and I've read 1984, and I've read Animal Farm, but he's written like 3 other novels and just a whole mess of essays that I haven't gotten to yet. He also wrote Politics in the English Language, which is an essay that I read. It confirmed a lot of things about writing that I already believed or already knew about. The importance of keeping things simple, the importance of being accurate and thinking about what you're writing, the importance of avoiding cliches. That's all in there. But he ties it into, if you can write clearly, you can probably think clearly. And if you can write and think clearly, you'll probably vote better or make better decisions when you vote, which is going to improve all of society. Whether that's going to happen or not, I'm pessimistic. Number 3 is A Hanging. This is another one from George Orwell. It's an essay about a hanging that he witnessed while he was in I believe he was in Burma at the time. The number 4, The Death of a Government Clerk. This was a short story. I don't remember who it was by. I think it was Dostoevsky. I think it was by a Russian. But it's about a government clerk who sneezes on someone higher up in the chain of command in communist Russia. I think it's communist Russia is where it's at. At any rate, he apologizes to the important person who just kind of blows him off. And he keeps trying to apologize to this guy where he becomes basically kind of stalkerish. The guy never gives him the response to the apology that he wants. So eventually he just dies because he realizes I'm so unimportant, I might as well be dead. It was a pretty grim story. Let's see, Commercial Break. That was another essay from Augustin Burroughs. It had to do with him working in the advertising business. Debbie's Requirements, I already talked to you about that. And then the last 2 on this list about power, authority, and moral pressure are from a collection of stories called Thieves' World. It's an anthology, and it's an anthology that I'm going to be buddy reading with my friend at Books, Songs, and Other Magic. Gareth and I will be reading these together. They were real popular when we were younger in the fantasy niche, and they are short stories. And the 2 stories that I've already read out of the first one, Thieves' World, were The Face of Chaos and The Price of Doing Business. One of which was by Lynn Abbey, and the other was by her husband, Robert Asprin, who was the editor for the whole series. The Price of Doing Business especially is all about the nature of power and political power. It's primarily about Jubal, who's one of the bigger criminal masterminds in the city. He runs a gang, And, you know, to say that he's kind of the Moriarty of the day, but he's a former gladiator. He's a real badass. He's not a genius mathematician, but he knows how to work the power game with the officials and you know, with the newly occupied town, with the new representatives of the empire there. He's trying to figure out how to get an edge. He's trying to figure out how to get in with Prince Cadacus and his men, and he's having a little more trouble than he expected. So it's real interesting. Yeah, so I wrote down for my theme here, you know, what happens to people when they're trapped inside of systems that they didn't design, but they're still responsible for them. And that holds true for most of these. I mean, Jubal, the crime lord in The Price of Doing Business, you know, he didn't set up the power dynamics in the city of Sanctuary. He just operates in them, and he's really good at operating in them. Yeah, and you know what? George Orwell didn't set up the system where he wound up with an elephant gun shooting an elephant. You know, if he'd set up a system for managing that sort of thing, it would have never fallen to him to have to do that. So, but that's just the first theme, and those are the ones that fell into that bucket. Theme 2, the second bucket that I have here, is myth, time, and the weight of the past. And so number 1 on that list is Ulysses, of course. We talked about, you know, he's reminiscing about his days adventuring and how much more sense the world made when he was doing that than it does now. Because he's good at it. Odysseus was good at going on adventures. He's not good at ruling a small kingdom. Tithonus is another poem by the same author, Alfred Lord Tennyson. And Tithonus is about a human, and he falls in love with, I think, the goddess of the moon. She falls in love with him. And she asks Zeus to grant Tithonus immortality. She forgets to ask to grant him eternal youth. So Tithonus is never going to die, but he's still aging. And, you know, that's not such a bad deal when you're in your 60s or 70s, you're still pretty good shape. But what's a 140-year-old man like if he continues to deteriorate? We don't know because they die. But what's he going to be like at 200 years old? You know, he's going to be wasted away to practically nothing. At 300, 400 years old, as his body continues to decay, but he's still got a robust mind inside of it. Anyway, the poem is about him asking them to take back their quote-unquote gift. Good luck with that. Number 3 is Lucifer and Starlight. Really cool poem. And these are all poems so far. Number 4 is called Samaria. That's a poem about Conan the Barbarian. And that made a nice companion to those sword and sorcery stories that I read from that first section, The Face of Chaos and The Price of Doing Business. You know, it fit right in because Conan the Barbarian would have fit right in Sanctuary. He would have loved it there. And then number 5 was To His Coy Mistress, which is terrific. To His Coy Mistress is a poem by Andrew Marvell. You probably read it already, but if you haven't, spoiler alert. The speaker of the poem is trying to seduce a woman, and he's telling her, look, you know, if there were world enough and time, this coyness would be no crime. In other words, you know, if we had the time, we could handle you being coy and silly about your virginity or whatever. But there is no time. You know, time is passing fast. We're never going to be this young again. We're going to be a day older tomorrow than we were today. And eventually you're going to get old enough that people aren't going to want to sleep with you anymore. So you need to go for the gusto while you can, you know, and I'm the perfect opportunity to do it. So yeah, really great poem, but fits right in there like a glove. And since I'm reading Tolkien right now, these poems obsessed with time and immortality are just a perfect fit. It's interesting what's happening here because I knew that there would be serendipitous themes among my reading when I started this Bradbury project, but I didn't necessarily expect them to show up so clearly and so early in my reading, but that's exactly what's happened. Theme number 3 is alienation, identity, in the modern mind. Okay, so this is where the more modern and postmodern stuff on my list wound up falling into. For example, the number 1 on this list is a poem called The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. That's one of my favorite poems, and I believe I've read it for Poetry Thursday as well. But anyway, yeah, if you're not familiar with The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, you should be, and I'm not going to spoil anything or surprise anything for you there. Go find it and read it if you haven't. It's free online at poetryfoundation.org. Number 2 is called Heisenberg's Uncertain Confession. That's an essay. I've got a book called Breaking Bad in Philosophy, and it's part of a series of books, a long series of books, taking pop culture and looking at it through a philosophical lens. And so there's one for Seinfeld and philosophy. There's one for every popular TV show that you can imagine, really. But yeah, this was an essay. These essays largely concern themselves with Walt's ethics and morals, and just how bad are they really. They don't ever argue that Walt's a good guy. He's an anti-hero, but how bad is he? It's an interesting conversation to have. Number 3 is called Vanderbilt Dreams. It's another one from Augustin Burroughs. This one was lovely. He's a very, very young child, and his parents take him on a tour of one of the Vanderbilt mansions, and he's absolutely convinced that he's a Vanderbilt and that he was kidnapped from the Vanderbilts, and that his parents who are taking him on this tour of the Vanderbilt mansion kidnapped him years ago and are just brazen enough to go back on this tour. And so, yeah, he just lets them know. But my favorite scene in that essay, my favorite moment, is when they get home at the Vanderbilt mansion. There's a bathroom where the bath has seawater in it. It's salt water. It's seawater, ocean water. And so when he gets home and he goes to take his bath, he goes and gets a thing of Morton's salt to pour in his bath so that he can take a saltwater bath, just like he would if he were at home at the Vanderbilts where it belongs. Really good stuff, funny stuff. Number 4 was a short story called One Night in Television City. This was by Paul DeFilippo. This was really cool, and this was really different from most of the other stuff that I read last month. I'm real excited about exploring Paul DeFilippo a little more. I remember reading an interview with Harlan Ellison, who's a writer that I greatly admire, where he talks about Paul DeFilippo being the best writer in science fiction today. Of course, that was a few years ago, but and there may be somebody better, there may not. But I mean, what I've read of Paul DeFilippo so far, he's really great. It's worth reading. And that was a really cool story. I didn't really understand exactly what was going on in it at first. It's kind of cyberpunk. But if you stick with it, it makes sense at the end, and it's like, oh, that was cool. Number 5 is a short story called A Perfect Day for Banana Fish. This is from J.D. Salinger's collection, 9 Stories. I have mixed feelings about A Perfect Day for Banana Fish. I always have. It's a very strange story, and I'm going to spoil it here. So if you haven't read it, I encourage you to ignore this part of the video. But if you want to talk about it anyway, basically, here's the action of the story. There's a man and a woman. They're on vacation near the beach. She is in the hotel room talking with her mother on the phone while he's out on the beach. And her mother is expressing concern about her husband because he's apparently had a nervous breakdown recently. Meanwhile, the husband, the young man, he's a veteran, is out on the beach making friends with a young girl. She's like 8 years old. It's perfectly innocent. And, he's talking nonsense to her, talking child talk to her, and he's talking about these mythical creatures that don't exist called banana fish, and he tells her a couple stories about banana fish. But anyway, eventually she decides that he's weird and leaves. So he goes back to the motel room, and he gets angry with a woman on the elevator for looking at his feet. And then when he gets back to his motel room, literally in the very last paragraph of the story, he gets his gun out and shoots himself in the head. Out of nowhere. I haven't figured out what it means yet. I read this story when I was much, much younger, and I've read it since, and I think it's one of those stories that's weird and kind of uncomfortable, and you just kind of have to sit with that discomfort. If you have a more traditional analysis of A Perfect Day for Banana Fish than that, I'd love to hear it in the comments below, that's for sure. And then also I read a short story called Ushers. This is a short story by Joe Hill. This was a cool story. Basically, the premise is that there are angels that specifically go escort you to the afterlife. And in this story, this one character can see the angels. They're called ushers. He can see them, but no one else can. And it gets him into trouble, as you might imagine. So, and then in my notes, it says, what is it like to be a thinking person in a world that doesn't slow down enough to accommodate thought. Yeah, that's the theme that encompasses these stories. Some of the other ones too. I haven't listed every single story and every single essay and every single poem I read. I just wanted to give you the highlights so you get an idea of where my head is lately. Finally, theme number 4 was play, wit, and the pleasures of literature. This was my favorite theme and my favorite category, starting with a poem called Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll. 'Twas brillig in the slithering toes, did gyre and gimble in the wave, all mimsy where the boar grows. That's just greatness. I absolutely love Jabberwocky. Number 2, I heard a fly buzz when I died. Number 3, because I could not stop for death. Those 2 are from Emily Dickinson. They're weird and cool and kind of morbid all at the same time, but they're not really as depressing as I thought they would be. Number 4 was an essay called Bookshop Memories by George Orwell. He worked in a bookstore. His depiction of working in a bookstore was amazingly accurate because I owned a bookstore myself 100 years after he wrote that and dealt with all the same stuff that he was dealing with then. And then finally, there were 2 more essays. Number 5 is an essay called Grades, and number 6 was an essay called Anglophilia. Those were both written by a book critic for the Washington Post named Michael Dirda, and they're from a collection of his essays called Browsings, which are basically just his thoughts about subjects related to reading and books. But yeah, basically, it's just a reminder that literature is allowed to be funny. It doesn't have to take itself that seriously. And that's what I've been reading lately. So come back tomorrow. I'll have a video about what I'm going to read next. Till then, stay hydrated, folks, and stay sexy.